The last piece that we have to talk about with this unit is actually writing equations of circles. So the last video looked at what the equation of the circle looked like and what information we can pick out from it. Now we're going to actually write those equations. So as a reminder, the equation of our circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where where h comma k is our center and r is the radius. So they can give us the information and ask us to write the equation of our circle. As you can see, sometimes they give us the radius and sometimes the diameter. If I look at number 1, they gave me my center and my radius. So I'm going to plug in the center and the radius for my h, my k, and my r. When I do that, I'm going to get an equation of x minus 5 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 4. Remember that my radius, I want radius squared, so I need a square too. The other thing to keep in mind is when we're writing the equation of the circle, while 5 and 3 are positive, in my equation, I have to have that minus in front. So the minus 5 gives me the positive 5 when I pull out my center, and minus 3 gives me my positive 3. It's the opposite. Number 2 is done the same way, so I need to square my radius to get r squared is 196. When I plug in -1, that's the same as subtracting a -1. I'm going to write it as adding. And if it's positive 7, then it's going to be -7. Number 3 gives me my diameter in this case, so I need to divide it by 2 to get that my radius is 9. Once I have my radius, it's the same process as 1 and 2. I'm going to plug in my center. In this case, they're both negatives, so I have a +2 and a +11. And then I'm going to square that radius to get my r squared as 81. Number 4, again, they gave me my diameter. I want my radius, so I'm going to cut it in half. When I square it, I get 256 as my r squared. For this center, my x is 0. So if you plugged in 0 and got x minus 0 squared, that minus 0 doesn't really do anything. So we can simplify it even more and just write x squared. Number 5. I have my center as -4, 0, and my radius is the square root of 47. Now, it looks a little complicated having the square root as your radius, but when we square it, squaring a square root cancels it out, so I'm just left with 47 as my r squared. Again, when we have a 0, we can write it in as y minus 0 squared, but that 0 doesn't really do anything, so we can just write y squared. Last example on this slide. Again, our radius is the square root of 158, but when I square a square root, it cancels out. And now I have x minus 15 squared plus y plus 6 squared equals 158. Couple more examples. For number 7, instead of giving us our radius, it told me my circumference. So I have to figure out what that radius is. Remember that circumference is found by doing 2 pi r. So my pi's will cancel out, and if I divide 6 by 2, I get that my r is equal to 3. Once I have my radius, I can square it, plug it in on the right, and then substitute my h and my k for my points. Number 8, again, I'm given a circumference, so I do need to figure out what that radius is. I'm going to divide this by 2 pi r. My pi's cancel out. 17 divided by 2 gives me 8.5. When I square 8.5, I get my radius squared as 72.25. And then I plug in 9 and 12 for h and k. 9 and 10 are the same way, but instead of being given our circumference, we're given our area. So area is pi r squared. That means I am going to cancel out my pi's, and I'm going to take 16 and square root it to get just my r, and that's going to be 4. Once I have 4, I can square that and write it as 16 on the right side and replace my h and my k with -8 and -11. Number 10, when I find my radius, I have the radius is 19. When I square that, I get 361, and then I replace my h and my k. Sometimes they'll give us graphs and ask us to write the equation based off of the graph. When we have our graph, we always want to start with picking out what our center and our radius is. In this case, our center is 3, -2. And to figure out my radius, I'm going to start at my center, and I'm going to count in any direction how many spaces I went. In this case, it's 5. Once I have my center and my radius, I can take that information and plug it into my equation of a circle. 12, same way, I'm going to start with that center, and the center is -1, 3. And then I'm going to find my radius by counting any direction how many spaces we went. Once I have that, I'm going to plug it into the equation of the circle and get my final answer. Writing the equation of a circle might not always be that easy. Sometimes we are going to have to do a little bit more work. When we are given a center and a point on a circle, we might have to use the distance or the midpoint to find missing information to write that equation. So as a reminder, here are our distance and our midpoint formulas. Again, you are going to have to remember these. They're not going to be given for you. If we look at problem 13, they gave us a center, and then they also gave us a point on our circle. If I want to write the equation of the circle, the missing information that I need is my radius. In order to find my radius, I can use the distance formula to figure out what the distance is between that center and the point on the circle. Remember, the radius is going to be the same for any point on the circle to our center. So I can plug in the center and the point into my distance formula and find my radius. In this case, I'm going to leave the radius as the square root of 40 because when I square it for my circle formula, it's going to just become 40. Remember, that square root cancels out. Then I can take my center and plug it in for my h and k into my circle formula. Number 14 is the same way. I'm going to use my distance formula to find my radius. So I can see the distance between my center and the point. Again, I'm going to leave it as the square root of 128 because when I do r squared, that'll become just 128. And then I'm going to plug in my center. So 1 and -5. 15 and 16 are the same way, so I'll show you those. Again, we're just using that distance formula to find our radius so we can plug it into the equation of our circle. So that's if they gave us the center and a point on the circle. We can also have problems where they just give us the 2 endpoints of our circle. If that happens, we have a little bit more work to do. The first thing that we need to do is find what our center would be. In order to find our center, we're going to use our midpoint formula. So remember, the midpoint formula is we're going to add those x's together and divide by 2, and add those y's together and divide by 2. So my midpoint is my center of the circle, and that's going to be -12, 5. Once I have my center of the circle, we can use that distance formula again to figure out what our radius is. You're going to use the center, but you can use either point when you plug in your x and your y. In this case, we chose -14, 1, and we got our radius as the square root of 20. When we write that in, we get our final answer as x plus 12 squared plus y minus 5 squared equals 20. 18, again, we were given 2 endpoints, so we need to start by finding our midpoint. When I do that, I find that my midpoint, or the center of the circle, is 2, 1. And then I'm going to use that in one of my points to find the distance so I know what my radius is. Again, you can use either point, it won't matter. You should still get the same radius, and you should still get the final equation of the circle. 19 and 20 are the same way, so again, I'm going to show you those. We're just finding the midpoint, then the distance, and then writing our final equation in. So we use the midpoint and the distance formula when we're given 2 endpoints of a diameter. We're just using the distance formula if we're given the center already and then a point on the circle. And sometimes they'll just give us all the information that we need and we'll be able to write the equation of our circle easily.